I always believed in equality. I mean, that was the type of liberalism that I was taught in my family. So I always believed in that. And again, the left now is not for equality, they're for equity. Equality is equality under the law. The law says we should all be treated equally, regardless of our race, gender, sexual orientation, and all of those things. Of course I'm for that. But they've now become about equity, that they want to rejigger everything. So we'll have X amount of black people as this, and X amount of gay people as this, and this. And that is actually anti-human because it removes the individual. It just says, oh, you are the sum of your parts. You're black, well, we know what to do with you. You're gay, we know what to do with you. You're a woman, we know what to do with you. I always say, defending my liberal principles is becoming a conservative position.
The radical left has always existed, and always called for a drastic reordering of our society, away from liberty, tradition, and order, and towards equality, redistribution, and some kind of intense intergenerational justice. The political left, however, has shifted and drastically changed in recent years. They've become more fervent, more radical, more out of control, less tolerant, less liberal, and less willing to operate in the normal arena of politics and political discourse. This trend emerged on college campuses, where self-proclaimed social justice warriors began to shift their focus away from the typical critiques of the economic order and towards a cultural crusade against Western civilization, democracy, the rule of law, and the very foundation of our free society. The left has been spiraling out of control ever since, as a small group of ideological radicals have been empowered to stomp on previous norms and hijack mainstream thought and institutions without recourse, correction, or apology. My guest on the season finale of the True North Speaker series was one of the first to tap into these changes and one of the strongest and clearest opponents of this new regressive brand of leftism. Dave Rubin has built his own media empire and hosts one of the most successful and popular shows on YouTube, The Rubin Report, which throws away the stale, old tactics of cable news interviews and taps into a large audience of people who enjoy honest, long-form conversations, thoroughly discussing ideas and focused on understanding the pressing cultural issues of our time. In my conversation with Dave today, we talk about a broad range of topics, from his career in stand-up comedy, to entrepreneurship, to getting black market haircuts during the pandemic. We also get into where and why the left went so wrong, and how we can expose their hypocrisy and combat their efforts to tear apart the foundation of our society. Well, it is my pleasure today to be joined by Dave Rubin. Dave, I'm a big fan, and it's so exciting to finally have you on our show. And I know you're promoting a book or trying to do a book tour remotely, which must be kind of interesting, just given that everything's still kind of locked down. You're in Los Angeles, right? What's life like in Los Angeles these days?
I am in Los Angeles. I am under lockdown. I am in quarantine. I did an entire book tour for a month where I was supposed to be in, something like 20 US cities across the nation. And then we were working on a Canadian tour, actually, and I was going to go to the UK and a couple other European stops. Ended up doing the entire book tour literally in this chair, which is in my studio here in my garage, which made it easy to do a lot of stuff. I was able to do more than I could have if I was on the road. But I do like being out there with people. I like performing live and feeling that live emotion with the crowd when you got hundreds or thousands of people in front of you. So I do miss that, but the book has sold really well. I think the things that I write about in the book are the things that everyone is talking about right now. So I think I've done something here that has some value in these strange times. But everything being equal, I would trade it all for the old world. You remember the pre-February world when I guess we could refer to those as the good old days now.
Well, it does seem like the sort of spectrum has changed. Like things that we used to complain about before just seem like, totally different than the fact that, I'm here in Toronto. I still haven't been able to get my hair cut, Dave. Believe it or not, I have not had a haircut in this calendar year in 2020. They're open now, but of course the salons all have like a 2-month waiting list now. So, just the little things that you kind of miss.
Your hair looks great to me. I have had I've had a couple illegal haircuts, and I'm sure my mayor here in Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, probably has a bounty out on my head. But I've got a good friend who is she normally is my stylist at a salon. She's doing it out of her garage right now. We'll have to keep that on the DL. Hopefully no Los Angeles County authorities are watching right now. But it's all, look, there's a real pandemic. There's no doubt about it that this thing is real. The question is, what level of lockdown and quarantine and change of life are we all going to be willing to accept seemingly forever? Because, the idea was we're going to flatten the curve. Well, we really did flatten the curve virtually everywhere. We didn't see overrun hospitals. I don't know of one single overrun hospital in the United States. I don't know of one single overrun hospital in Canada. That's not to say there aren't little areas that have bigger bumps than other areas. But this idea that we should just completely change our way of life forever and put restaurants at half capacity, even if everyone walking into the restaurant has been checked, had their temperature checked, and all of those things, restaurants won't be able to stay open. I mean, they're not going to be able to pay their rents. They're not going to be able to pay their employees. And it's not just restaurants, by the way. Of course, it's mom and pop stores and, pretty much everything else that isn't a giant corporation that can figure out ways to survive. So we're watching a changing economy. I think we're watching a changing political structure. All of our institutions are crumbling around us, when we talk about academia and newspapers and media and all of that. And we're just in a massive time of change right now. And, hopefully if you've got your head on straight, you'll be able to get out of it okay.
Well, I totally agree. There's so much sort of uncertainty and so much questioning. I mean, some of those institutions deserve to be changed and challenged, and some disruption would be nice. A lot of people are moving more online and that kind of thing, and people are sort of distrusting this culture of ruled by experts. We're always deferring to experts, and we learn that, hey, sometimes the experts are totally wrong, and what they're telling us isn't great. And I think that we should sort of be challenging that. But I also see sort of a rise of some of the cultural trends that you really talk a lot about, like the rise of sort of safetyism. So people saying, I would rather take all these extreme measures to stomp down liberties and not allow people to do basic things, to save one life or something like that, which is totally preposterous. But you're seeing kind of more and more of that. And that's something you've kind of been watching and talking about for a long time, especially on college campuses. Does that sort of concern you, or is that something that you've seen and been concerned about for a long time?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been concerned about it forever. But, as the saying goes, those who would trade liberty for security deserve neither. And I think what we're suddenly all doing is trading in our liberty, meaning our ability to go to friends' houses and celebrate the 4th of July, say here in the United States, and go to the beach and be free people. That doesn't mean take no precautions. It doesn't mean cough on old people. And it doesn't mean touch everything and then touch your face. But have some level of personal responsibility for you, your family, your loved ones, your local community, and figure out how to stay open as a country. If we trade all of our personal freedoms in for security, the idea being, people usually think of security meaning we're going to be kept safe from being shot when we walk down on the street, or kept safe from terrorism or something like that. But in this case, the security that we're talking about is the security of a amorphous, invisible at some level disease, this pandemic of COVID. We will never be able to leave our houses again if that's how we want to treat this. Because, when you hear these people that say, oh, well, we've got to lock down until there's a cure. We've got to lock down until nobody can get sick. Well, first off, we don't have a cure for the common cold. But putting that aside, there will always be risk. Life is about risk. Every day you walk out of your house, you get struck by lightning, bit by a dog, hit by a car. There is a litany of other things that can happen to you. You could have a monument pulled down on your head if you're walking in a public park. Anything can happen. And these days anything will happen. And the idea that the government can protect you from all of that and make your life risk-free, it's anti-human, actually. To be human is to mitigate a certain amount of risk, and you have to decide what your risk level is. It's really as simple as that.
It's a really good point. And, one of the things that, what they're planning for and what they're trying to prevent presumably is impossible. I think that's so much of a theme on the left, from my perspective, is that they have this sort of utopian idea of what the world could be like if only we had the right people in charge and the right government structures. And that's sort of, as people who are not on the left know, that's a fallacy that's not in line with human nature, and yet that's sort of what we constantly see. So I want to talk a little bit, Dave, about your career and your transition, because you've had a really interesting career. You started out as a stand-up comic, and you transitioned, I believe, to becoming a political talk show host over at the Young Turks, which is a left-leaning or left-wing YouTube channel. So how was that transition?
You could say it, far left.
Far left. Well, one of the things I'm constantly trying to figure out is what the difference is between someone who's left-wing and someone who's far left, because there doesn't really seem to be a good distinction, and increasingly they're blurring lines even between the mainstream left and what I would consider the far left. But for you, so you left being a stand-up comic and decided to get into the political talk show world. Were you sort of firmly a left-winger at that point, or what was your thinking at that point?
Yeah, I talk about this a little bit in my book. I think the default settings that I had, the factory settings that I had by growing up culturally in America through a public education, which I had, most people grow up kind of lefty. There's just this sort of basic idea: Democrats good, Republicans bad. Lefties care about poor people, Republicans care about money. Democrats are for peace, Republicans are for war. A series of these very simple and obviously not true things that you just get through television and culture and media. That's just what you start thinking. And I would say, in effect, I was that. I came from a family. I grew up in New York. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in Long Island. I lived in New York City most of my life. I went to college, upstate New York, SUNY Binghamton, where I was a political science major. So I'm a true New Yorker. And then 8 years ago, I moved, a little over 7 years ago, I moved here to Los Angeles. So I've only lived in New York and LA. And it's kind of funny because when you think of New York and LA, you think of, these bastions of the crazy leftist political ideology. And yet the things that I talk about freedom, personal responsibility, limited government, all that resonates really well in the middle of the country. So I don't know how it happened that I went from growing up there to living here, and yet the middle is really where I belong, I suppose. I would say that I was always kind of political. As I said, I was a political science major. My family, we debated everything, every holiday. We would have 20, 30 people sitting at tables and arguing about abortion and foreign policy and the whole thing. And then dessert would be served and everybody was fine. Nobody ever stormed out of a dinner because of politics. There were family fights over family things, but it was just like, this is what you do. You argue about things, and then, dessert rolls around, you have a piece of cake and you're good. And I think that was really embedded in me, which is why I don't mind talking to people that are different than me politically. I actually really like it. And I think it's also why I'm open to changing my mind if I get some other information. But to your earlier point about it's hard to tell what's left versus far left or whatever, that is a real problem of the modern left, because you're right. The left has become so monolithic. If you don't tick off the exact things that they believe right now, and the second that they believe it, you better believe it too, otherwise you're out. And that's why they're constantly purging people. And interestingly, what I see happening on the right, so for example, I could show you that on the right, there are all sorts of interesting people right now. You have sort of traditional conservatives, you've got MAGA, Trump-waving people, you've got libertarians, you've got really sort of the far ANCAP people who are like sort of super libertarians. Those people are all having an interesting fight about what the future of the right, of conservatism is. That's pretty healthy. You don't see these people destroying each other and all that. On the left, you basically have the progressive monolithic ideology, and then there's a couple sort of mugged old school liberals. That's what I would say I am, or at least was. And they're just being purged. And I think what they're realizing is, as they're being purged from the left that now says you have to have, 8-month abortions are okay. I mean, these are crazy positions. Or $15 minimum wage as we're automating everything. These are things that don't make any sense. What's happening is that if you're a decent lefty, meaning an old school liberal, you're going, hey, those people on the right, they're not that bad. And maybe they're not all bigots and racists and the rest of it. So I think there's a really interesting political realignment happening.
It's interesting. So my husband and I spent a couple of years living in California. We were in the Bay Area. And, Silicon Valley kind of has a reputation of being very left wing and very monolithic, like you said. But our experiences with our friends and people that my husband was working with and stuff was that even most Democrats recognize that their party has gone too far, or they don't agree with the like every boilerplate position. But then you go on social media and you kind of see it feels different. Like it feels like all the lefties agree and they're all pushing this sort of cancel culture, extreme positions, like some of the stuff you talked about. And I almost think it's driven a little bit, at least now, by this sort of Trump derangement that, you know, they believe that Trump is so bad that you kind of have to stay aligned with the left because, I mean, they don't want another 4 years of Trump. How do you think Trump plays into this whole new sort of alignment?
Yeah, well, I do think Trump derangement syndrome is real. I am not a doctor, but I believe that it could be clinically diagnosed. These people that will take any position as long as it's the opposite position of Trump. And, you know, you can say whatever you want about Trump, but Trump's great skill, obviously, is that he understands people. Trump understands human emotion and how to manipulate it. Now, depending on whether he manipulates it to spread freedom or to spread anarchy or to spread authoritarianism or whatever, those are all things that we can debate about Trump specifically. But he knows what people want, what people care about, what moves people, what changes people, all of that. I would say that he has exposed something in the left. That it doesn't seem to me that if you're the average Democrat, you're the average lefty, it seems to me that you don't know why you think anything that you think. You just kind of believe it to be true. We have to have minimum wage, or it has to be a $15 minimum wage. We have to have Medicare for all, or, you know, universal health care for all. How are we going to pay for it? We don't know, but we just feel that we should have these things. Everything that they do is based on feelings. That's actually quite different than what I see on the right, where generally people know, if you're from an American perspective, if you're on the right, you believe in individual rights, meaning that everyone, regardless of race, religion, sexuality, gender, any of those things, if you're a legal member of the United States, you should be treated equally under the law. That's a pretty solid bedrock principle. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone on the right lives up to that at every moment, but that's sort of the underlying principle that allows conservatives, libertarians, ex-lefties to all sort of accept that that's what society is. And then, of course, that's safeguarded by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's a pretty beautiful system. On the left, in effect, they just say, oh, I think something, and that means it's kind of right. And that sort of subjectivity explains why they're so hysterical all the time. So it's like, you know, Bernie comes out and he says $15 minimum wage. And now Bernie has never run a business. Bernie doesn't know why he believes that, but he believes that's just a number that he should accept, and then because he accepts it, other people should accept it. But then what happens is, this did happen a few weeks later after he said that, Rashida Tlaib, one of the squad, one of the worst congresswomen that we have here in the United States, she said $20 minimum wage. And it's like, oh, well, he just made up a number. And since they believe government is inherently good, well, then why shouldn't the number be higher? And then someone will say, well, why not 25? Why not 40? And that is the flaw. I think that is the most fundamental flaw of leftist thinking. They don't know why they believe what they believe, other than it sort of sounds good. Free education for everybody, free college for everybody, free food for everybody, whatever it might be. Now that all sounds good, but we all know nothing's for free, and they get very upset when you ask them how to pay for it. So that difference between individual rights, which is a bedrock principle of equality, versus I just kind of feel the government should do things because, you know, I kind of feel it and that's kind of right. That explains the asymmetry that we have right now.
It's so true. I was sort of on the left too when I was in university, and my thinking was usually just like, why wouldn't we? You know, we're a rich society. Why wouldn't we help everyone? Why wouldn't we give more money to homeless people? And it's not until you take a couple of economics classes or you read a little more that you realize, okay, there's not like unlimited things that we could do. And to a point earlier, the government isn't perfect. So a lot of things they try to do ends up having all kinds of unintended backfiring effects. Well, you mentioned that.
And by the way, just very quickly, I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't think that most people on the left have bad intentions. I think some of them do, actually. I think Bernie, at this point, is so wrong about so many things that I believe his intentions actually to be bad. I think AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, I actually do believe their intentions are bad. They think America is fundamentally evil. and want to alter it. But the average lefty who's just chanting mindless slogans and saying most of these things, I don't think their intentions are bad. I think their intentions are exactly what you just laid out there when you were in university. And basically, they need to wake up and start understanding the world as it is, not as they wish it to be.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that does that, Dave, is having your first job and realizing how much of your money goes to the government. I had a really good friend in university who was further to the left than me, and we used to always debate. I became more libertarian, and she was opposed to everything that I was talking about, and then she became a lawyer. And I remember she had like her first paycheck, and she called me up, and she was just like, okay, like I'm a libertarian. I tried to take the bus this morning, it didn't show up, and so I had to end up like calling a taxi. Like the government doesn't work, and they take all my money. And I feel like that process of just having a job, being employed, and I think one of the bigger things is taking a risk and starting your own business. I think starting your own business, having to worry about not just surviving and reading the market, but also doing payroll and paying for employees is one of the most sort of capitalistic things that you can do. And doing so, it kind of cements your ideas about the market and how it works and why it's better than a government-run system. I know you took a big risk when you left the Young Turks and you started your own thing. I want to know, what was that like? Have you always sort of been entrepreneurial, or were you nervous? What was the hardest part about starting your own show and going on your own?
I don't know that I was always entrepreneurial in a business sense, really, but I always I've always had a sense of adventure. If you're going to do stand-up in New York City, you better have a sense of adventure, because that's going to be a pretty miserable existence. You might enjoy the 10 minutes you're on stage, but the rest of it, handing out tickets in Times Square and having to drag friends to show and being heckled and all that stuff, you better have a sense of adventure. As for the entrepreneurial part, when I left the Young Turks and eventually I moved over to Aura TV, which was Larry King's digital network, and then we left there to go to Patreon, which was our first chance at fan funding. Eventually we left Patreon and I started my own subscription network. So we've taken a lot of risks where me and my director and my producer have jumped from job to job, where we've given up salaries, given up health insurance with the idea of building something on our own. And I'm thrilled, and probably most out of all the things that I've done, I think I'm most proud of the fact that right now I have two separate businesses, because I have my production company that runs the Rubin Report, obviously. And we've got about 8 employees, and I pay all their health insurance, and we pay our guys well, and we treat them well, which, by the way, there's a reason I do that. It's not because I'm some benevolent Jesus figure. It's because I know if I treat my guys well, they're going to work hard and feel rewarded, and it will make my product better, and that's good for me. That's called rational self-interest. That's a pretty great thing. I also have locals.com, which is my tech company that I started in the midst of all this. My companies have no debt. We make payroll. As I said, we treat our team great, and we're always expanding. We just hired 2 people this week at Locals. And one of the things that I'm really thrilled about is that it's not just that I talk about these ideas of low taxes and why small government's important and why small business is important, all that. I've put it into action in my life. And I think that that's one of the things that the progressives generally don't do very well. They rail about all of these things, but they don't want to put them into practice in real life. I don't like talking about my former employers that often, but just a very easy one, because you mentioned them, is that, on the Young Turks, they scream and rant and rave about unions all the time. And then in the last few months, you probably saw the story, their employees wanted to unionize and they fought them on it. And they said, no, we're too small to unionize. So they preach about it for everybody else, but they don't want it for themselves. And that's so consistent with what I see out of the progressive ideology. You should live by our rules, but we can't live by our rules because we got reasons we can't, but you should.
I think that's the biggest reason why so many people are skeptical of climate alarmists as well, because here in Canada, for instance, we have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and his government is very green, very, very, very committed to climate change ideology and talking about it, and sort of lecturing Canadians. They implemented a carbon tax and all that kind of stuff. But then you look at their actions. They fly all over the world. They brought like an entourage of 200 people to the Paris Accords when they were there. They're spending boatloads of money. They'll fly all over the world just for a photo op or whatever. And it's like, how can you sit there and tell Canadians that we need to make fundamental changes in our lives, including a very hefty tax that makes our economy less competitive relative to the United States and other countries, when at the same time you're not really practicing what you preach. Justin Trudeau banned single-use plastics, and then he's there at the protest drinking out of a plastic water bottle. It's like, come on, man, you gotta practice what you preach, at least if you want people to follow you.
Progressive 101, he's for diversity and tolerance, and Trudeau's also been in blackface. Was Stephen Harper ever caught in blackface? I'm gonna guess not.
Absolutely not.
Right. So it's like, this is what they do. They virtue signal constantly. There's that photo, I'm sure there's probably a video of it too, a couple of years ago, Justin Trudeau at the mosque where it's separated men and women, and he always tells you what a feminist he is. Meanwhile, in this place, women have to come in the back door and can't be with men. Now that's up for the religion to decide, and the people who prescribe to that religion. And by the way, that's not just an issue in Islam, obviously. In Orthodox Judaism, they separate the sexes. Religions have all sorts of things that they can do. But to run around and say, I'm for women's equality and I'm for all of these things, and then you're actually okay going to religious places where things are not equal, it's just endless virtue signaling. And just because you say you're a good person and have nice socks, Trudeau always has nice socks, I'll give him that. The guy has spent a lot of time thinking about his socks. Perhaps it would be better if he would think about some of the things related to lowering taxes for you guys, especially out in the West. They know what's going on with the oil over there. It's like, this is what they do. They look good, but are any of the things that they're doing good? That's the question.
Well, Trudeau is particularly image obsessed. I think he puts more time and effort into his photo ops and however he's going to look and dress on a certain day than anything into the policy. But yet he gets away with it. I think it's partially to do with the press up here, and I know your press down in the U.S. is particularly biased as well. But up here, they sort of have a love-in for Trudeau, and they don't bother asking him tough questions.
Well, yours is also state funded, by the way, which complicates it. And the machinery of the state happens to be in line with his sort of lefty policies. If you ever get a conservative back in office, I suspect they will not be as friendly to Trudeau. But, again, this is the type of guy who will run around screaming about cultural appropriation and the racism of Canada. And it's like, how many outfits have we seen Trudeau in where he's actually culturally appropriating and dancing in Indian garb and any of those things? I'm not saying he's racist. I think by his own estimation of what makes someone racist, he's racist.
Well, absolutely. He doesn't, again, to the point, he doesn't live up to the standards that he preaches. You've had some controversial guests on your show, Dave, and I think that sort of becomes like a caricature. The left likes to say, Dave Rubin has become far right because he had Stefan Molyneux on his show or something like that. How do you combat some of that criticism, and what do you think about it?
Well, first off, I've done hundreds, if I don't even know, maybe 1,000 interviews. I don't know how many interviews I've done, but hundreds and hundreds, certainly. If you're going to be an interviewer, you're going to talk to people across the political spectrum, the religious or belief spectrum, the philosophical spectrum, whatever that is. You're going to try to have a wide swath of people. When people ask me this question, I always say, it's possible that I've interviewed somebody and not every single one of my interviews was the perfect interview. I try to sit across from somebody, and usually I have a couple notes and questions I want to get to. But I always say at the end of an interview, if I didn't have to look down at my questions once, if I just was able to sit there and do this, that to me is a great interview. Now, sometimes in the course of that, you're going to miss something. Maybe, sometimes someone will say something sort of crazy, but I want to let them finish their thought. And then it goes on a little too far where I feel like I can't quite back it up. Sometimes I do end up backing it up. Look, you're interviewing me right now. You may look back on this interview 2 years from now and go, man, I should have asked Rubin this, that, the other thing. Or when he said that, I should have said no, this, that. As far as someone like Molyneux, I knew it was going to be controversial when I interviewed him. He obviously just got banned from YouTube. By the way, I'm far more worried about the power that YouTube has of banning people than I am of the ideas of Stefan Molyneux, even if his ideas are odious and nefarious. My feeling was that what I should ask him is, why do you care so much about race and IQ? What is it about you that makes this an issue? It's not an issue that I've ever spent any real time thinking about other than to prepare for my interview with him. I don't think I've ever, maybe it's once come up in any of the other hundreds of interviews I've done. Honestly, I can't even recall another time that it came up, but perhaps it has. I felt I asked the right questions. Now, a ton of people were angry at me. A ton of people said this proves that I'm far right and all of this other stuff. But what I do find interesting about that is that people always seem to gatekeep to the right, but never to the left. So in other words, if you talk to Milo or Stefan Molyneux, or some people would say you shouldn't talk to Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro, or people that are more traditional conservatives. Well, then there's these people that attack you for it. But if you talk to virtually anyone on the left, Al Sharpton is a crazy far lefty. He's on MSNBC. He's friends with Louis Farrakhan, who is a complete Jew hater. But you're allowed apparently to talk to him because we get Jamel Hill and other social justice warriors. Wasn't it Ice Cube just a week ago talking about how great Louis Farrakhan is? I mean, on the left, they seem to do no gatekeeping and you can get away with it all the time. On the right, we seem to have to do gatekeeping. And again, it's one of those asymmetries. But I think the simplest way to answer your question is, I've talked to all sorts of interesting people. I never treat anybody differently. And that's going to come with some risk. And if some of them weren't perfect, you're not going to believe this, but I'm not a perfect human.
Well, and also the guilt by association. This happens all the time in Canada. So, there's a very controversial sort of far-right person named Faith Goldie. You might have heard of her. And, before she went sort of far-right or alt-right, she used to be sort of more like a mainstream Catholic conservative, and she would do a lot of events and that kind of thing. And so a lot of people have pictures with her because she was like a famous sort of conservative commentator. And then all of a sudden, she went too far. She crossed that line. And like you said, the right does a good job of gatekeeping. So she started going down that alt-right path, talking about race and that kind of thing. And people cut her off, but it didn't matter because the media and the left used all of that as sort of, these horrible accusations saying, well, if you once 5 years ago appeared at an event with Faith Goldie, that must mean that you're a secret racist. And they play this horrible game. And it's like, like exactly to your point, the left just doesn't do that. And
well,
also
they also...
Go ahead.
They extrapolate it over time, because sometimes you could talk to somebody and then years later they do something and then they say, wait a minute, but you talked to them, and you say, well, I talked to them before they did that thing. And even that doesn't matter, right?
Well, the context doesn't matter. They don't care. They just want to use the photo as like, here, this is evidence that you're done, and this is why we should cancel you.
Interesting, you mentioned Faith Goldie. I actually did meet her once. I don't know much about her work, truly. I don't know that I've ever read anything she's done. I've seen her come across Twitter every now and again. But one time I was at an airport, I think I was in Canada actually, on tour with Jordan Peterson. I'm pretty sure that's when it was. And a girl came up to me and told me what a big fan she was, and blah, 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 and told me she's a YouTuber and whatever. And I'm pretty sure we took a selfie together. She took the selfie. And then the tour manager who I was with said, oh, do you know who that is? That's Faith Goldie. Now, again, I really don't know much about her, so I'm truly not even passing judgment on her. But I mention it because, as you say this thing about people taking pictures with each other and associating with each other, people, every time I go to the airport, someone takes a selfie with me. Every time I go to Whole Foods, someone takes a selfie with me. The idea that you can be judged, the totality of your life can be judged by these things. Let's not forget, Jordan Peterson took, after all of the shows that we would do, he would do a meet and greet. If you paid extra, you could take a picture with him and get a signed book. He did thousands and thousands of pictures. All you do is shake his hand, take a picture, walk away. That's it. You can't even ask him a question because they have to just keep it moving. You may remember that when there was the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, which was a shooting at the mosque there, it turns out that a few weeks before, there was a guy who took a picture with Jordan, and it said something to the effect on the shirt, I'm against Islam because I'm for women, I'm for gay people, blah, blah, blah. And then Cambridge University decided to end their relationship with Jordan, where he was going to study the Bible, which was one of his true... I never saw him happier than the day he told me that he got that. He was going to be like an adjunct professor sort of thing there. And he was going to be able to learn there for 6 months, and he was going to take some time off. He was thrilled. Because he took a picture with a guy that had some words on his shirt, they ended that relationship. Think about it. He took so many thousands of pictures. The idea that he even read that guy's shirt or even saw it is just absolutely bananas.
Well, now that I know that picture of you and Faith Goldie is out there, Dave, I think you should be careful because that could get you in trouble next time you come to Canada. You've done so many interviews with Canadians. I was just thinking about it because you've had obviously Jordan Peterson, I know you did a sit down once with Lauren Southern,
I love
Lindsay
Lauren,
Shepard,
yeah.
who I work with, and she was on your show. Who else? Stefan Molyneux's Canadian, Yasmin Mohammed, Janice Fiamenko, who is awesome. I've worked with her as well. Oh, and of course, I can't forget Maxime Bernier, who's the one who actually introduced us and helped set up this interview.
Yeah.
So, but what is it about Canadians that there's so many interesting conversations to be had? What do you think about Canada, and why do you have so many Canadian guests?
It's a good question, and I've thought about it a little bit. And when I did the tour with Jordan, obviously, his adopted hometown is Toronto because he was a professor at University of Toronto. He's from Calgary or Saskatchewan.
No, northern Alberta. Yeah, just north
northern
of Edmonton.
Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Western Canada, right? So we spent a lot of time in Canada, and I always found the Canadian audience, and I've obviously been to Canada on family vacations, and over the years I did the Calgary Comedy Festival years ago, and I've been to Banff, and I've been to Toronto and Montreal and the rest of it. There's something about Canadians that I've always liked. I don't, well, first off, Canadians generally are very friendly, I find. Canadians are friendly. There's a sort of, almost like a little bit of a softness there. I don't mean that in a negative way. Like just a niceness there. Maybe it's because you guys have, a lot of space without that many people. You can breathe a little bit more, something like that. But I found the Canadian audiences to be really, really fun. Did you happen to see any of the shows that I did with Jordan by any chance?
So I didn't though, but I will say I saw you do a stand-up show in San Jose a couple of years ago. But that wasn't
nice.
with Jordan. That was just you. I think you were on your stand-up tour, and my husband and I went and saw you. It was great.
Oh, nice.
Actually,
nice,
do you know what?
cool.
He got one of your T-shirts. You were doing this thing where you
Oh,
were
yeah.
asking people how they ranked on some kind of a hierarchy, and he shouted something out, and then you threw him a T-shirt. So he
Yeah,
loved it.
I do. We do like an oppression hierarchy, and I get the
Right.
whole audience to yell, what's your oppression? And it ends up being hilarious because people come up with funny things. The best one that I ever heard was a woman said her oppression is that she's 1 inch taller than officially being called a midget, and thus she is oppressed because of that, because she cannot get whatever benefits might come with that. But in any event, I mention the tour with Jordan because in Canada, one of the jokes that I would always ask, we did the Q&A together at the end, and usually the audience would submit questions, but one of the things that would often come up would be, will Jordan ever run for Prime Minister of Canada? And just by asking the question, the crowd would go bananas, please, begging him and applauding and screaming, and he would have some funny responses to that. But I just think, well, look, Canadians are known for a great sense of humor, so much great comedy. And some of the comedians that we think in America, we think of as American comedians, like John Candy and Rick Moranis and a lot of the SCTV guys. I mean, that was a Canadian venture, basically. There's just such a legendary feeling of comedy and goodness from Canada. Yeah, I've always loved Canada.
Well, that's great, and hopefully we'll have you up, and you can do some more events once this crazy coronavirus thing
Listen,
shuts down.
when I get up to Canada, I'm building the wall so nobody else can come in.
Well, I want to talk about your book because, first of all, I think it's one of the best names for a book I've seen, and it seems so relevant at this time. You've got a copy behind you there called Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason. So I think part of the book is about your personal journey going from the left and leaving the left and why you did that. But you're also talking about how rare it is for people to think for themselves. I think you might have coined the term the regressive left. I don't know if you coined it or you certainly popularized it. I'd never heard of it until watching your videos. And you really kind of help cement the idea that, okay, wow, the left is actually really closed-minded and doesn't really allow the free sort of liberal discussion that you think liberals are supposed to promote. So tell us a little bit about the book and what led you to writing this book at this time.
Yeah, well, for the record, Maajid Nawaz, who's a former guest of the Rubin Report and author and British radio personality, he's the one that first came up with the phrase regressive left. He had mentioned it a couple times on Twitter. I was the one that sort of popularized it because I started talking about it on my show all the time, and it really, the phrase, oh, they're not progressive, they're regressive, they're not for moving forward, because moving forward would be for equality for everybody, not equity. Meaning equality of opportunity, not quality of outcome. They're actually moving backwards because they're viewing us based on our group characteristics, and that actually is bigotry. So I credit Majid in the book for it, because a lot of people do think that I came up with the phrase regressive left. By the way, I just heard Rudy Giuliani say it yesterday at the White House, and I thought, wow, that's pretty good. Maybe that did trickle up somewhere there. Look, the genesis of the book and the idea behind the book is that although I lay out all of my political positions, every position that I have, the point is not to make you say, oh, you must take these exact positions to be a good person or to be a classical liberal or something like that. The idea is think for yourself. Really, really think through, why are you pro-life or pro-choice? Really think through whether you think there should be universal health care. Really think through, what does sensible foreign policy mean? Like a simple one like that, like, there's this idea, if you listen to the lefties, it's like, oh, no war. There should be no war. There should be no military-industrial complex. But, well, yeah, we all would love peace all the time. But just because you say you're for peace, that doesn't mean that there are no bad guys out there. So you have to talk about things in a complex way. So I believe in a very strong military, not because I'm pro-war. I want America to be the strongest nation in the world, so people know they cannot bring war to us, so they take us seriously. That's called deterrence. I mean, this isn't my idea. This is an idea that has been churned through literally for thousands of years. Why do you have a strong army? Why do you have a strong castle? Why do you have a moat? These are things to protect yourself. But again, the left is really good at coming up with these slogans that you kind of think it's right. And what I want people to do is go, oh, it's not for free college. Okay, yeah, that does sound sort of nice. But is it that they really want everyone to get a full holistic education? Or is it that they want everyone to be brainwashed into the stuff that they think? We know that something like 90% of college professors are lefties. Well, what a great place to send people if you want to indoctrinate them into your ideology, Bernie Sanders. So it is pretty sweet, on top of the fact that, of course, it is not free. So I just want people to think seriously about these things. And if at the end, your conclusions on a couple specific policy issues are different than mine, that's A-okay with me.
Well, one of the points you make in your book is that there are good people on both sides that come to their beliefs in a good-hearted way, but you feel, or you think that the right is more willing to engage and discuss, especially in good faith, or your experience has been, whereas the left is sort of unwilling to. And you kind of see that. Like, I think Ben Shapiro has had like an open invitation to debate all kinds of different left-wing people, and very few ever take him up on the offer. And increasingly, left-wing people don't even want to be seen on the same stage or on the same platform as conservatives, because they think that their ideas are truly evil. So how can people on the right engage and have these open conversations if the left is unwilling to discuss things with us?
Well, it's a tough question, because I don't know that there's really a good answer, other than we have to keep putting our best foot forward. We have to keep turning the other cheek, but also not becoming abuse victims. You're right that in many, many cases, lefties are now refusing to talk to conservatives at all, because they have decided that all of their ideas are so evil, inherently racist and patriarchal and everything else, that that's their excuse for not having to defend their ideas. And by the way, that is much worse on the left than the right. It just is. I know everybody wants to say, oh, or not everybody, I know a lot of people want to say, oh, the side, they're equally bad. The left is just as bad as the right is just as bad as the left, the Republicans are just as bad as Democrats. That's just not possible. They have completely different views on things. That doesn't mean that one is inherently better than the other, but they're probably not exactly equal, right? Like, that's just not even possible, that they're just equally good and equally bad if they have completely separate views of the world. Right now, it happens to be the right is more open-minded. I have debated gay marriage on my show with Ben Shapiro, who has a religious interpretation of marriage. I'm obviously for gay marriage. I've debated the death penalty. I'm against the death penalty. Dennis Prager is for the death penalty. I've debated all sorts of things. Legalization of drugs. I'm not for legalizing all drugs. I'm for legalizing marijuana and psychedelics. But Michael Malice has been on my show. He's for legalizing all of those things. It is very hard to find leftists that you can debate with that at the end will shake your hand and say, okay, I agree to disagree. On the right now, there's plenty of opportunity to do that, and I'll keep talking to those people.
Well, I think part of the reason that the right has this openness to debating is that we finally have our own platforms. Like, I think, especially in the last like 20, 30 years, the media has become increasingly left, and there aren't as many spaces for conservatives and right wingers, which is why new media and new kind of like independent media outlets, and even your show provides a platform where you can actually have long form discussions and open ended discussions, which helps people realize that there's more to conservatism than just the sort of slogans, or like thinking that conservatives hate gay people and they hate women and they love war and whatever else the sort of bumper sticker is. So it sort of has been shows like yours that has enabled really in-depth conversations and fleshing out of ideas. So since you left the left and came over to the right, do you consider yourself a conservative? Have you changed your mind on any specific issues at all since you've sort of come out as being a classical liberal or someone who's no longer on the left?
Yeah, well, I would say the one thing, people ask me this a lot, I would say most of the fundamental principles that I always believed in equality. I mean, that was the type of liberalism that I was taught in my family. So I always believed in that. And again, the left now is not for equality, they're for equity. Equality is equality under the law. The law says we should all be treated equally, regardless of our race, gender, sexual orientation, and all of those things. Of course, I'm for that. But they've now become about equity, that they want to rejigger everything. So we'll have X amount of black people as this, and X amount of gay people as this, and this. And that is actually anti-human because it removes the individual. It just says, oh, you are the sum of your parts. You're black, well, we know what to do with you. You're gay, we know what to do with you. You're a woman, we know what to do with you. I would say that the one thing that I've absolutely shifted on for sure is economics. So I'm way more libertarian economically. That's why I'm a low taxes guy. I'm a states' rights guy. I want to do everything possible to make small business flourish. So for sure, I've moved to the right on that. Most of the other things that I argue for, I think actually are classically liberal positions. But at the same time, I always say defending my liberal positions is becoming or defending my liberal principles is becoming a conservative position. So I don't want to blow it yet, but my next book, we just signed the deal and the title will be announced probably next week or the week after. And at that time, you will be able to ask me if I consider myself a conservative. How about that?
Okay, well, that's exciting. Congratulations on the next book. I think people are still excited about this book, but that's great. One of the other things in Don't Burn This Book you talk about is don't check your privilege, check your facts. And one of the issues I have with debating left, even just like we had our Canada Day celebrations, and I was posting very unabashedly patriotic Canadian messages, and I was getting a little bit of hate both from the left and the right because the right hate the prime minister right now, and there's a lot of sort of animosity towards central Canada, especially from out west, Alberta. They have very reasonable criticisms of the government and their picture. But on the left, they'll say, well, Canada is this oppressive, colonial, even on the one day a year where we're supposed to be patriotic, put our differences aside and just love our country, they're obsessed with looking at every negative aspect of Canada. And they'll just say, oh, check your privilege, Candice, like you're privileged, that's why you think that. It's like to sort of write off your idea, like to just say like you're privileged, therefore your view doesn't count. It's like, well, what about my experiences? What about my knowledge? What about my understanding of history? What, I've traveled around, I've seen a lot of things. I'm not some privileged person living in a bubble that has no idea what's going on in the rest of the world, but they throw that line out there and it sort of it paralyzes you because you're like, what can you even say back to that? It's like, yeah, sure, I'm privileged. Of course I am. I live a good life and made good decisions, and that's that. But how do you combat that? And what do you mean by that when you say, check your facts, don't just check your privilege?
Yeah, well, check your facts is first just know when you're entering an argument, know what you're talking about. Have some data, have some talking points in the right sense of talking points, so that not everything you say is just based on feelings. Oh, I want to help poor people, so we have to give more money to programs. Well, that does sort of sound right, but then if you look at the data, once you give people all of these benefits, you keep them generationally trapped in a cycle of poverty. So you should know some statistics related to that, and in this chapter I lay out a lot of statistics related to gun stats and to poverty and a whole slew of other things, the wage gap and a bunch of other things. But when I say don't check your privilege, look, when people talk about white privilege or cisgender privilege or straight privilege, these are all nonsensical terms that eliminate you as the individual. Candice, I've only known you for a half hour or so. You strike me as a very thoughtful, decent person. I know nothing about your upbringing, whether your parents are married or whether you came from a broken home or whether you were born poor or born rich or whether you were maybe addicted to drugs at one time in your life or the litany of things that have led you to this moment. I know nothing about it other than I can get a vague sense from one conversation of who you are. And it seems to be a good person who is thoughtful and interesting, right? That's the best I can do at this moment. And after we do this, hopefully I'll know you more and then we can go from there, right? This idea that we should judge people, white privilege. So let me get this straight. White privilege exists. And if you're white, you have privilege by your birth color. So you're telling me that all of the poor people that grow up in meth-addicted families in the middle of the country on opiates and a whole slew of other stuff, that, you know, their teeth are falling out and they're in crime and poverty and all these, they're privileged. They're privileged because of that. I don't believe that. That isn't to say that some level of discrimination doesn't exist, but we should also acknowledge that at this point, you know, we're almost at the point where the left will scream about systemic racism, which doesn't exist, meaning that there's no racism in the system. There might be individually racist people, but if you can't show me a law in the United States that is racist towards people. We did have laws, right? We had Jim Crow laws. We got rid of them. If such a law existed now, I would be for getting rid of that law. But in many ways, you have almost every privilege by being a minority now, because most likely you will get that job instead of the white person. So in 30 years or something, when white people are a minority in the United States, are we going to now have brown privilege, and then white people should have laws that pick them up? I mean, none of it makes any sense. But again, it's one of those things. It just sort of sounds right. Yes, white privilege, straight privilege. And it's all nonsense. There's one privilege here, and that's you are born in the United States. Man, you got a chance that almost everyone in the world would love to trade for. That's the privilege.
Well, and that's why if Canada and the US had open border immigration policies, our countries would be completely overrun, because obviously people from all over the world, different skin colors, different cultures, different ethnicities, they want to be here. They want to be in the US, they want to be in Canada, and that should tell you something about our society. But the left, I guess, just doesn't really see it that way. And I
Look,
think
they tell you two things at once. They tell you how horrible we are and how, we have a genocidal maniac is in charge of the country. And what do they also tell you? We want open borders. Why would you want open borders? So that other people can share in the horror of this thing? You think Trump's keeping anybody in the United States? If you want to leave, go. Hitler didn't let people leave, right? He subjugated and then exterminated his own citizens. You think Trump is stopping anyone that wants to leave the United States? I'm pretty sure he'll buy you a ticket if you want to leave.
Well, and that's the big difference between Trump's wall and the Berlin Wall, which the Berlin Wall was designed to keep people in. And I also note, interestingly, that wall was known as the anti-fascist. It was an anti-fascist wall. So that was
clever.
That was anti-fascism back then. And here you have people, wanting to get into the country so badly that they're willing to scale walls and climb over it. One of the things I'm most concerned of right now, Dave, is just the mob mentality. And, your book is about being an original thinker, being a free thinker, and standing up against sort of political correctness. But, just over the last 6 weeks or so, we've seen the protests over the George Floyd death, which I think almost everyone I've ever heard speaking about it condemns it as being a horrible act of police brutality. I haven't heard anyone defend the police officer. So we were all in agreement. We had a moment of potential unity where we could all just say, police brutality is wrong. Killing an unarmed person, regardless of what color they are, is wrong. But suddenly the mob sort of shifted, and it turned into railing against capitalism and society and trying to tear apart America. And you had these sort of Black Lives Matter edicts that everyone had to repeat. And if you didn't, you got fired or you risked being excommunicated. I think it had a chilling effect where conservatives just didn't really even want to say anything. They didn't want to comment. They didn't want to stand up to it. They didn't want to mention it. And I think that was, to me, the worst aspect of it, is seeing how, how people get afraid of speaking their mind because there are real life consequences. And a lot of people were getting canceled, not just on the right, but on the center and even on the left. We've seen countless examples of it. So I just want to get your take on what's happening culturally at this moment in time, and what steps we can sort of take to find some normalcy.
Yeah. Well, first off, where I live in Los Angeles, when we had that week where there were protests and violence everywhere, there's still some ongoing protests, but that one particular week, a few days after George Floyd's murder, which, by the way, you're completely right, everyone across the political spectrum condemned. I was on Sean Hannity's show 2 days after, or the day after, and he absolutely was condemning it and is still condemning it. This was a no-brainer for everybody. I haven't heard anyone across the political spectrum really say that this should have happened or that this was just or something like that. So you're right, there was an opportunity. But what's interesting is when LA was being destroyed, I drove down one of the main roads here where all the businesses were barricaded up, and wood in front of the glasses, big panels, and they all say Black Lives Matter, peace, unity, da da da. And it's like, if you really think about what's going on here, what's happening? Is it true that every single store for a mile long is for Black Lives Matter, meaning the organization of Black Lives Matter, and really agrees with these people politically? Or are they hostages? Are they hostages who say, oh, if I don't write this slogan on my cardboard or wood cutout in front of my window because they're going to break my window, they're going to burn down my store? And we obviously know what the answer is. That's not to say some of the business owners don't believe in the organization of Black Lives Matter, but all of these people that are talking about love and tolerance and they're writing these slogans on their doors, what you're saying is, please, please, don't destroy my stuff. And it's like, are those the good guys? Are the good guys the ones that make you do that? That sounds far more like a mafia tactic than some sort of peaceful, loving, diverse, inclusive group of people, right? So my feeling right now is that between what happened with COVID and being locked in our houses, and then the economic fallout of that, right before all of that, what was happening in America? Well, we were going through the impeachment thing, which turned out to be a sham, and Russia was a sham, and Ukraine was a sham, and we didn't go into World War III when we assassinated the Iranian general Soleimani, and we survived net neutrality. They have taken us on such a adventure, an adventure in made-up stuff, that now we're at a point where it's hard to gauge what is real. And I think a lot of people are walking around going, well, we must live in this deeply racist society. But let's not forget, at Trump's State of the Union, which was back in January, although it's not very long ago, he was talking about the lowest black unemployment ever. And who sat there with their arms like this? The Congressional Black Caucus and all the Democrats. I thought we should be for low black unemployment. But again, they want to take him out at all costs. And I'm worried that over the rest of the summer and then leading into the fall for the election, they're going to do everything they can to tank the economy, to make sure we're in the middle of a race war or God knows what. And it'll be on us. It'll be on the calmer heads to make sure that they don't win.
It almost feels like the country is just so divided. I say the country, but I think you're in the same situation in the US that we're in Canada. The society, the culture is so divided, where you have people on the left who, it almost seems like they don't want to reconcile. They don't want to find a middle ground. They don't want to find unity. They want to destroy the other side. And I think that sort of goes with your thinking on, like, the left has become very regressive. They've become very hateful, very small-minded in a way. Do you think that there is a path towards continued unity? Like, how can we have a society together if the left is so dead set on stripping conservatives of any positions of power, stopping conservative thought, getting rid of it on university campuses anytime there's a right-wing thinker, having them canceled? I mean, how can we possibly live in a society together and live in a country together when there's such animosity towards one side?
Well, I would say in a healthy society, you want a tension, a somewhat healthy tension between conservatism and liberalism, meaning on the conservative side, you want the idea that, oh, good things of the past must be conserved, especially freedom and liberty. And then on the liberal side, you want, oh, but there are new horizons where we can hopefully expand freedom. And you want that tension to be pushing and pulling and constantly battling back and forth. You actually don't want, you hear people say, oh, we want to destroy the other side. I don't think in a healthy society you'd want that, because once you destroy the other side, well, now there's nothing really left for you to check your own excesses. And we're all just humans, and our systems are made by humans, and we could all go off the deep end with any idea. So to watch the left go bananas like this, I think is deeply dangerous, because there will be nothing, if the left snaps in half and just goes, they're there already in effect, then there's going to be a vacuum of balance, and you do want some level of balance. I think the only way we get out of this that I can possibly foresee, if we're going to remain Western free countries, and there are ways I can envision that not being the case in the future, but if we are to remain free countries, the thing that must happen, in effect, the Democratic Party in the United States, and I don't want to talk about this purely from a Canadian standpoint because I'm not an expert in Canadian politics, but from what I know, the Labour Party in Canada and the Labour Party in the UK.
The Liberal Party.
The Liberal Party in Canada and the Labour Party in the UK. In effect, they must be destroyed. Not destroyed so that they'll never exist again, but they must be destroyed so the bad ideas will finally be purged. Now, in the UK, their Labour Party did get destroyed. The Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party got annihilated in the last elections. I think that is good for the future of the UK. What is happening here, it's like Biden is the last firewall against the real radicals taking over, and Biden has dementia and a slew of other problems. Nobody knows what he thinks about anything anymore because he's trying to pretend he's an old school Democrat and then also trying to pander to the far left base. That thing needs to be destroyed. And by destroyed, it's crazy for me to say this. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Trump has to win in a landslide. And by the way, even if he wins in a landslide, they're still going to revolt. They'll say the election was rigged. They're going to be violent on the streets and all that. But I think that perhaps what would happen is, after losing to Trump twice and getting crushed, I think it's possible then that some of the old liberals will be like, no. We let the inmates run the asylum and we have to rebuild. A phoenix could rise from the ashes. But if it goes the other way and the lefties win and Biden's president, they will do everything in their power to destroy conservatives forever. Through big tech, through whatever governmental agencies they can, they will make sure that the ideas of conservatism will be treated as the ideas of Nazism. That is insanely dangerous. And then I think hopefully you get through 4 years of Trump, and then after that, what I see really is the hopeful thing on the horizon is that in 2024 you're going to get a really interesting crop of Republicans. You won't need a Trump anymore because you won't need the great wrecking ball anymore, but you'll get people like Dan Crenshaw and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, people that are moderate, interesting, that skew from conservative, more traditional conservative, say like Nikki Haley, to Dan Crenshaw, who's a little more libertarian, and then you'll have a great debate amongst them, and I think that gets us to sort of an American reset. But what could happen in the next 4 years to get there, only the Lord knows.
Well, I have to say, because I was living in San Francisco when Trump was elected, and when Trump first came on the scene, I didn't like him at all. I thought he was just the wrong kind of conservative for the country. I was sort of more of a Ted Cruz kind of person. And over time, I came to appreciate Trump because I felt like he made all the right people angry. Like the left is going to paint conservatives as being these horrible, hateful bigots no matter what we do. So why not find someone who can really push back and this no nonsense kind of approach. And then when Trump won, obviously we were really surprised. I was in San Francisco. I remember there was like a sense of terror and horror in the city at the time, and with friends and people that lived in my building and stuff like that. And I thought, this is kind of what the country needs. They need to realize that just because all of their friends are huge Hillary supporters and they're Democrats, there are these other Americans who are not influenced by CNN and not influenced by the media, and they have their own values. And maybe the left will kind of wake up and recognize that instead of just demonizing Trump, we should try to get to know conservatives a little more. We should try to get to know our fellow countrymen. And I think that was an optimistic take, because obviously
Right.
reaction has been completely negative and they haven't learned anything. In fact, they've gotten more fervent and crazier and probably worse down that
Yeah,
path.
which by the way, that gets to what we talked about earlier about how they base everything on feelings. So when things don't go their way, they use that as proof, as opposed to what a rational person would do if things aren't going your way. You might reevaluate what you're doing. That's what you would do in your life. They use failure as a reason to double down on what they think. They've come to believe that failure is proof of all of the things that they believe, which is a seriously dangerous thing. But Candice, you mentioned, living in San Francisco, you're in an apartment building. Okay, they all think Trump is evil. Guess what? Trump has come for none of those people. Did Trump pull any of those people out of their apartments? I don't think so. Did Trump burn any of the buildings down in San Francisco or in Los Angeles? I don't think so. Who was it? It's the lefties that are doing it. When they come one day for Bill Maher, when they come to Ellen DeGeneres' mansion, when they come to Jimmy Kimmel's house, who's going to be burning down their houses as rich people? Is it going to be the Trump supporters, or is it going to be the lefties? And I think everyone knows the truth, and it's obviously the lefties.
Well, hopefully people will come around and have the same sort of transition that you've had to sort of seeing the light. I wish that more people were as sort of open-minded and free-thinking as you, Dave. Now, on our show on True North Update, we like to do a little bit where we ask our insiders to submit questions. So we have a couple of questions from the True North Insider Club that they'd like to ask you. So, Dave, this comes from Eric and Nicola. They say, what would you like Donald Trump to read to become an ideologue? I know Trump has been criticized for not really being conservative enough. So if you were advising Trump, what would you like him to read, or what would you like him to know to become more conservative?
Well, I don't know that I would want him to become a pure political ideologue. I mean, I think his magic is actually what you just described, his ability to understand people, as we were talking about earlier. I would say, I mean, this would be the same thing that I tell everybody to read, which is he should read On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. I have a copy in my nightstand. I mean, it's this thick. You can read it in an evening. It's pretty dense. You're going to have to stop a couple times and reread some chapters. But really, I wish if I wanted to know one thing about Trump a little bit more, is I sense he has a great understanding of people. I sense he loves America. He's brash. He's bold. He's an egomaniac, all of those things. I wish I had a better understanding of, does he really understand what the principles are that made us free? Like, I think he has a feeling for why America is great. But I wonder, does he really understand what individual rights are, separation of powers, the philosophical underpinnings of the things that led us to freedom? In a weird way, I don't even know if it's that important that he would read it, because again, he is the battering ram that is saving these things. So even for someone like you, who like Ted Cruz, who's a more constitutional conservative, I can completely get on board that. There's no doubt in my mind that Trump is a far more effective leader than, say, someone like Cruz would be, because Cruz, even though I believe he knows the Constitution, could probably read half of it to you, off the top of his head. I don't think he would be as effective as someone that could fight through the media, fight through the BS and the nonsense, where Trump could. That being said, I think if Trump maybe had a little bit better breadth of understanding of some of the core principles, it probably would be good. It would probably be a net good.
The thing I like about Trump, though, is that he seems to know his own limitations. So things I've heard from people who work in the administration, that kind of thing, is that he has good instincts, and he'll sort of say, this is what I think about China and Hong Kong. And then he'll kind of just let the people, let the top scholars and let the people running, do their thing and enable them the space needed. So, I mean, I think that Trump is in a good position, but of course, for me, I wish that he would just give up Twitter. I wish that he would take.
You know what though?
He gives Twitter too much power. Like Twitter is surviving and doing well because of Trump, and I don't know that they really deserve that kind of treatment because of him.
Yeah, I hear you on that, but it's a catch-22, because Trump accomplished the thing that nobody thought anyone could accomplish by becoming president. So even though I agree with you in principle, like when I see him fighting with, what's his name on CNN, Jim Acosta or somebody, it's like, man, you're the president, let it be. But on the other hand, he was the one that figured out how to use the system to become president when everyone said he couldn't. So I always am like, can we really tell him to ease up on it? Like, we couldn't have done what he did. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but I hear you.
Yeah, you're right. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So let Trump be the magical, crazy person that he is, and yeah, hopefully he can continue to do good. This one comes from Evan. He says, "Will the left ever turn back towards some sense of normalcy? Do you think classical liberals will ever take back the Democratic Party?"
Well, I mean, I would say we sort of answered that before, where if these guys completely implode, maybe a couple liberals wake up and there's a return to old school liberalism, more of a JFK who was a Democratic president. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's the reverse, obviously. Then it's the 180 reverse, actually, of what Bernie Sanders says. I don't sense that there's, in the short term, any hope for that. If you are a left-leaning person, or if you're an old school liberal, or you just want there to be a healthier other side, the best you can do is stay with the conservatives, with the libertarians, and within that construct, fight for what you believe. So, I'm begrudgingly pro-choice. That's obviously one of the hardest issues to talk about publicly. And for conservatives, it's like the biggest no-no that they don't accept. And yet I'm able to debate that with Ben Shapiro and with Glenn Beck and with many other people. And I'm not here to convince conservatives to be pro-choice. I'm truly not. What I'm here to do is have those conversations with them so that they can understand where some of the other people in the country, where they lie politically, or why they think what they think. And you have a chance to do that there. The chance that this thing can be saved on the left, I just see no evidence of it. I see no evidence of it.
Well, and it's good to know where people are coming from, because it does help you even improve your own argument if you're actually able to sit down with someone who has a different view on something so sort of sensitive. I mean, here in Canada, most conservatives have even just given up on that issue because it's so divisive, and the meme that you hate women if you don't believe in having unrestricted abortion laws, it's effective, and so people just sort of step back. And even now, the people running for leader of the Conservative Party, I don't think any of them are pro-life at this point. So,
well, look, think about it this way. These people that say, okay, you can have 8-month abortions. Doesn't matter why you want an 8-month abortion, you can have an 8-month abortion. Well, now, generally, those are the people who also will tell you that they're for gay people. Now, when science is able to actually identify the sexuality of a child, and now a Christian conservative, forget Christian conservative, and anyone says I found out that I'm 8 months pregnant and my child is gay, but I don't want a gay child, I should be allowed to have an abortion. The lefty's going to say yes. I don't know, they're going to have to pick, am I for gay people or am I for abortion? So you have to confront them with these ethical dilemmas, and usually you'll watch their heads explode because they're not that good at thinking these things through.
Well, the boilerplate ones are a lot easier. The slogans are easier than the actual.
You hate all women is always easier. Yeah.
Is the easier one. Okay, we've got a few more here. So Ryan asks, you've had your struggles with big tech companies from Patreon to YouTube. How can we rein in left-wing tech companies, and what is the future for conservatives on these tech companies?
Yeah, it's a big question we could do an hour on. I mean, in short, I would say I fundamentally believe in competition. I started locals.com. We're building digital homes for creators. You guys should be on there. We give you the tools to build a community that you own the video, you own the audio, you own the user data. We have live chat. We're working on live video streaming. We're not building a platform the way Twitter or YouTube's a platform. We're building you a home. So RubinReport.com is my digital home that I control all the information. And it's behind a paywall because I actually believe if you charge people a couple bucks, they'll treat it a lot better. So we have no trolls or bots. And it's a pretty beautiful system that we're building. And anyone can sign up to create a community for themselves at locals.com or check out some of the people that are on Locals. But I also believe that, Trump probably did the right thing by rescinding some of the protections that social media companies have. I don't like the idea of government regulation, the idea that a government regulator is going to understand how to regulate YouTube properly. That just seems crazy. You don't take one big problem of big government and combine it with another big problem of big tech. But if you remove some of their protections, now that's probably good. So we have a big battle to fight, and in many ways, the battle may be too far gone. But look, there is hope. Parler seems to be gaining some momentum right now, so anything's possible.
Are you on Parler yet?
I am now at Rubin Report on Parler. I got my name. I think I've only sent out one message so far, but I'm at least there, and I'm just going to kind of hang out, and we'll see what happens. But Dan Bongino, who's one of the guys behind it, I just had a phone call with him yesterday, and I believe that there's many ways to skin a cat. So if Parler can do something good, and locals can do something good, and somebody else can figure out something with blockchain, and we all can tackle this in a different way. Look, David beat Goliath, so I think there's a chance that Dave could beat Google. I really do.
Well, I hope so. Okay, we got two more questions here. This one's
Yep.
actually from my husband, Kaz. So he says, there's been an exodus of free thinkers leaving both Northern California and the East Coast for Los Angeles. You have Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Lucky Palmer, and then you also have these sort of conservative free thinkers, Joe Rogan, Dennis Prager, the Daily Wire guys, etc. So why is everyone going to Los Angeles, and what's making Los Angeles so special in terms of a sort of bastion of free thinking?
Yeah, it's funny because Shapiro was born here, so he's been here forever. Prager's been here for quite some time. Thiel did move here from San Francisco about 5 years ago. I think Elon is back and forth, but mostly in LA. I do sense that people are going to start leaving LA too because, you've seen the riots and everything else, and our mayor is a super progressive and all that. On top of the fact that the taxes are crazy and everything else. I think really what happened was San Francisco went so bananas with leftism that people decided to leave. And the fact that Peter Thiel, who's a billionaire, thought this is unsustainable here for me to have a company to hire truly intellectually diverse people as opposed to diverse, their immutable characteristics, diversity of their immutable characteristics, that he said, I've got to get out of here. We've become pretty friendly, and it's like there is something brewing here, I would say, center right in Los Angeles that I'm very happy to be part of. And, a lot of people have been begging me to move to Texas, but I want to stay and fight here for a little while and see if we can turn this thing around.
Well, good. I mean, California used to be Republican. It used to, even not too long ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, and there was, a middle class opportunity for people to own a house. I know that just doesn't really exist in the Bay Area. It's so expensive because of left wing policies, but people don't really see that.
That right-wing radical Arnold Schwarzenegger was once governor of California, not too long ago. It's only about 10 years.
Well, it's crazy how fast Democrats can destroy a society, but it happens. Okay, we've got the final question here. Dave, you voted for, and I think you endorsed Gary Johnson in the 2016 election. Would you go for a libertarian or an independent again, or do you think you're ready to jump on the Trump train and endorse Trump?
So my thinking behind the Gary Johnson thing was that, I had him on the show and I thought he was a totally nice guy. I admitted in the video that I did where I said I was going to vote for him, I admitted that he was not a great libertarian candidate. He wanted to force the baker to bake the cake for the gay wedding. That's just such a reverse libertarian principle. The Aleppo moment, he had a couple really terrible gaffes. But he was being ignored otherwise, so he only made news when he had a bad moment. So I sympathize with that, and I think he's a decent guy. I just don't think he was a great candidate, although he was quite a good governor of New Mexico, actually. As far as this year, I will not vote for a third party this year because I can't, at some level, my public persona or existence has become too big that I can't tell people what I think for a living all the time and then take the easy way out, because the easy way out, of course, would be voting for the libertarian candidate. Joe, is it Joe Jorgensen or Johnson? I'm blanking actually, is the libertarian candidate. I think Joe Jorgensen.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
You're not even sure, that's fine. It's American politics, you don't need to know. Until we invade, which is coming next summer. Joe Jorgensen, I think, she's the libertarian candidate. I'm gonna have her on the show. But I know the libertarian things she believes in. In effect, I see no way, if you care about liberty or freedom or the Constitution or not burning down all of our institutions, destroying every monument, ransacking every library and everything else. If you care about any of those things, I don't see how you could vote for a Democrat, whether it was going to be Biden or whoever they're going to replace him with, or whoever actually is the VP who will really be the president, because it's obviously not going to be Biden, or it's just the party leaders behind him that are running the show. So yes, in effect, I see no way around voting for Trump, which, by the way, I think a lot of former Democrats feel. It's like, think about it this way, if you voted for Trump in 2016, is there any chance you're looking at the other side right now and going, yes, that seems right, I'm going to vote for them? You may not be thrilled with everything Trump did. You may have lost your job because of COVID. You may be upset about all sorts of things. But I can't imagine someone who voted for Trump saying, oh, I'm going to vote for senile Biden and the Marxists. It just doesn't make sense. What I could see is a lot of good people going, I begrudgingly voted for Hillary, or even I really liked Hillary, but the Democrats now are completely bananas, and I don't believe in this socialist lunacy. Nobody's going to stand up for it, certainly not Biden. So I'm going to kind of hold my nose and vote for Trump. So I think, it's a little hard to say still. We got months to go, and there's going to be a wacky summer and COVID and everything else, so it's hard to predict. But I see no way around voting for Trump at this point.
Well, Dave, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and coming on the show. And hopefully when the lockdowns end, we'll get you up and you can do some kind of a book tour or something in Canada, because I know you have a lot of fans up here, a lot of people who love your show and love the fact that you had Maxime Bernier on and gave him a bit of a platform, but also obviously that you're so open to talking to Canadians, and also you have such interesting guests and you're constantly sort of pushing things forward. So we appreciate all you do. You've got lots of fans up here, and we appreciate your time today.
Candice, thank you very much. I've enjoyed talking to you. Tell Mad Max that I said hello, and yes, I will get to Canada hopefully sooner rather than later.
All right, take care, Dave.